I'm going to talk about the mystical journey. First, I'm going to tell you a story. There was a high society older woman in New York who went to her travel agent. She wanted to go to an obscure village in the Himalayan mountains. The travel agent tried to talk her out of the trip, saying it was too difficult for her. She insisted. After a long and arduous trip, she arrived at her destination. She went to the local temple and requested an audience with the guru. She was informed that the guru was meditating in a cave for 6 months and could not be disturbed. She was persistent and explained that she had traveled all the way from America just to talk with the guru. Finally, she was told she could go to the entrance of the cave, but she could only say 10 words. She agreed. She had to take an old bus to the ox-drawn cart, and finally she walked a long distance to arrive at the entrance of the cave. And she said, "Bernie, enough is enough. It's your mother. Come home." Sometimes that's the way it feels when we're on a spiritual journey. It's time to come home. Some feel that the mystical experience is just a passing phase, but for others, like me, it's a lens through which all life is seen. Let's first view the mystical journey from a psychological and spiritual developmental perspective. Scott Peck, a psychiatrist and author of the longtime bestseller, The Road Less Traveled, was one of the pioneers of transpersonal psychology, where the patient's spiritual values were incorporated in traditional psychiatry. In The Road Less Traveled, Peck described how some of his patients became religious as a result of the therapy, while others left their traditional religion. He wondered why. He developed a theory of psychological spiritual stages. It's a simplification of James Fowler's 7 stages of spiritual development. Peck viewed the largest group of people as the base of a pyramid. These people were in a chaotic, egocentric state, seeking meaning and happiness through money, power, sex, drugs, work. It could even be good works. These are individuals who often found traditional religion a vast improvement over their chaotic lives. Evangelical and traditional religious communities ask people in chaos, how would you like to get your spouse back? How would you like to get your job back? Stop self-destructive actions and be a member of a caring, supportive community. They offered new meaning in positive direction versus their chaotic, out-of-control lives. Peck saw the highly structured traditional religions as a second level of the pyramid. The group-centric state was a vast improvement over the person's previous chaotic state. I love the traditional religions. I think they're wonderful. Peck also worked with individuals who were members of traditional religious groups who wanted answers to questions that the group could not or would not answer. These were people who left their religion to enter into what Peck called the third level, the search level. Postmodernist pluralists, progressives, Unitarian Universalists certainly are part of this third stage, as are many Buddhist and other non-traditional spiritual organizations. These individuals ask questions that the previous 2 levels either were not curious enough to ask or were afraid to ask or didn't want to ask. True searchers are fearless in their quest for knowledge. At the top of Peck's pyramid was the fourth level. These were mystics. He was not a mystic, but he had a basic understanding of mysticism. Since he was not a mystic, he did not describe this stage, which is what I'm going to discuss. What is the mystical journey, and what is a mystic? I had a mystical experience at around age 10. Some of you were older than me, but when I had that, I was age 10. I called a mystical experience because it was an internal experience that resulted in certitude, in certainty, that I was more than just my body and my ego. The experience changed my view of life 180 degrees. I agreed with the Indian mystic Kabir, who said, I glimpsed it for 15 seconds and I became a servant for life. I also agreed with his statement, the intensity of the longing is what does the work. So at age 10, I entered Peck's third stage, the search stage. One of the problems with searchers is we want spirituality reduced to a very simple concept. As H.L. Mencken said, for every complex problem there is an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong. Mystics will tell you that mysticism is beyond words and then ask you to buy their book. I've read hundreds of them. So, of course, what am I going to do in the remaining 10 minutes? I'm attempting to explain with my words my understanding of mysticism as simplistically as I can, which is part of the spiritual teaching and which I've already told you is impossible to do. But I'm going to do it anyway. That sounds like a paradox. Paradox is part of spiritual teaching to get you to look within beyond the limitations of normal thinking. As Leo Tolstoy said, the only thing that we can know is we know nothing. And that is the highest flight of human reason. Zen Buddhism is famous for their koans, like, what is the sound of one hand clapping? A koan is a paradoxical anecdote or riddle used to demonstrate the inadequacy of logical reasoning and to provoke enlightenment. Here are some other spiritual paradoxes. Mahatma Gandhi said, everything is insignificant. It's just very significant that we do those things. Suzuki Roshi said, who's a Buddhist, everything is perfect, but there's always room for improvement. And I always say, to know you don't know is to know. For me, the mystical journey consists of 3 elements. So here I am going to reduce it down. The first is I intuit that I am part of something larger than my body, my ego, my psychology. There's something larger that I'm connected with. This larger something has names like God, like isness, like transcendence, like the Tao. Secondly, I intuitively communicate with the transcendent, which shows me the mystical path. Doesn't do much good if I've got something here that I'm a part of and I can't somehow communicate with it. So it gives me some directionality. The problem with it is it's often like a dream-like quality, and it's rarely completely clear. This is the way you go. You go that way, that way. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen very often. But sometimes, like you were talking about with spiritual interruptions, it does. In fact, it may say, you're going this way, and you said, no, I don't want to go that way. Yes, you are going that way, and you end up going that way. Third, my most important job in life is to follow the inner communication as best I can. No one can do the work for me. To do my job, I know I have to practice. This was a great practice. This singing is one of a marvelous practice for connecting. Fortunately, I can't sing that well, so that doesn't work for me, but I do what I can. Suzuki Roshi said, you can't make a date with enlightenment. Gaining enlightenment is an accident. Spiritual practice simply makes us accident-prone. It's important to be open to your inner experience. Reading books, meditating, teachers, discussion groups are traditional mystical practices. I continuously lose my spiritual perspective because of life's unexpected challenges. Now, I'm married, got 3 kids, so things happen. At work, all these things happen in our lives. It is my practice which helps me stay connected to the transcendence, to God. My practice changes over time. It used to include spiritual retreats, extensive study, and lots of meditation. Currently, here are my practices. I'll just tell you what I'm doing now. So, I wake up in the morning and I say how thankful I am for life and family and friends. I heard the other day Oprah Winfrey said, if you just say thank you first thing when you wake up, that's a good beginning. 30 minutes of morning exercise, 20 minutes of meditation. I take the dog out, and I live on the river, fortunately, and I take him out to the dock and appreciate the river. So you can do that without being mindful, or you can do it mindfully. I do it mindfully. I practice music every day. Again, not much of a musician, but I practice. It connects, just like the music connects. I read a few pages of a spiritual book before I go to bed. I listen to spiritual books in the car. You mentioned L'arche. I take Michael, who is an adult with disabilities, to morning prayer 4 days a week. That's like from 8:30 to 9. And then they go to where they go after that. But nobody can take him because of the dynamics there, so I do it. And my wife and I have been meeting in a small group for supper and a spiritual discussion every Wednesday for over a decade. Every Sunday from 9:30 to 10:45, I attend the UUCJ Spiritual Studies class, and I attend this church service. The point of these practices is to remind me to be aware of my connection to love, the transcendent, to God. Two recent practices was preparing this talk and promoting my book, Pathways to Awareness, which I wrote years ago. Writing Pathways to Awareness and doing seminars years ago was a spiritual practice. But after a while, I moved on to other practices. Recently, a writer friend of mine encouraged me to market Pathways to Awareness again, which I am open to do. By the way, I have books downstairs. Yeah, I told you. But I'm donating the proceeds, $10 a book, to UUCJ today for the auction. So, 7 steps to spiritual freedom. In my book, Pathways to Awareness, I write about 7 steps to spiritual freedom, and I'll briefly go over these. First is trusting that you know. This can be tricky because we all come to the mystical journey from different perspectives. If I do not have a sense of being connected to something larger than myself, then I'm probably going to be wondering what's all the fuss about. But most people I have met have an intuitive sense of something higher. 2, finding the spiritual way that is right for you. There is no, in my opinion, no one way. Seems obvious to me. But there are many who insist that their way or their group's way is the only way. And that's fine. If that works for them, I think that's wonderful. But there are a lot of people who that doesn't, they need more than that. As for spiritual, as my spirituality matures, I change my direction many times, in many ways. 3, our bodies as spiritual tools. We all know how closely our peace of mind is connected to our body's well-being. Many of the doctors and hospital programs are now recommending meditation. A holistic spiritual regimen includes healthy eating and healthy exercise. 4, contacting the spiritual voice within. I find a persistent practice, like the ones I had mentioned, is the best way for contacting my spiritual inner voice. There is no secret to spiritual practices. Just be open and willing to move on to a new practice. In other words, follow your inner voice. For over a decade, you might find this kind of crazy, for over a decade, I meditated nightly from 2:30 in the morning to 3:30 in the morning. Currently, I'm not doing that anymore. I do not feel the need for that practice. As my life evolves, my spiritual practice also evolves. Keep what works and add new experiences. Visit new and different communities of spiritual seekers. Retreats are great for challenging and exposing you to different points of view. 5, fighting the spiritual battle. As our spiritual maturity grows, our relations with others will mature. It is often easier to meditate than change how we deal with others and the rest of the world. We can do a lot of praying, but if we don't bring that to our relationships, I question the value of it, even though it does have some value. As we become more connected on the inner journey, we express a parallel loving connection to others and to the environment. If you're not experiencing outer harmony, you should re-examine your inner practice. You may be in a rut and need a teacher or to meet some new spiritual seekers. Being in community with others is always an important part of the spiritual practice and the spiritual journey. 6, living in the now. To be present enables you to experience your spiritual connection more fully. Living in the now is easier said than done. I'll digress a little bit. When I was talking about in the meditation and experience the person that you love or that what you love and get that person, that's not the point. The point is the experience. It's not that person. You're experiencing that connection. And you can take that connection and hopefully take it from that person or that art or that pet and move it to the next person. And to me, because I've heard a lot of people talk about being in the now. What the heck is that? That's what's being in the now, is that connection. Giving, which, with that connection, takes me to the 7th and last one, giving back to the world. As your practice grows over time, you will naturally incorporate helping others. As many of you know, I'm involved almost daily with L'Arche, a community of adults with disabilities. They're only about 3 minutes from here. 8 years ago, my wife Kathy and I moved from the house we'd lived in for 33 years to be closer to L'Arche. And this is a strange thing. If you ask me why I'm so invested in L'Arche, I don't have a clue. Really, I don't. I mean, I didn't have a history of it. I'm not a social worker, business guy. And I don't know why. But I know it feels right. I just know it's an important part of my spiritual journey. I also know I receive much more from them than they give to me. And I'm sure you experience this in your work when you're working with the kids. It's the same thing. Except you probably know why. I don't. So my call to action, and I think a talk should have a call to action, is to encourage you to develop a spiritual practice, even if it's no more than meditating 5 minutes a day. A spiritual practice has a lot in common with learning a musical instrument or singing. To learn to play an instrument or sing, you need to practice every day, and you need to be dedicated. The spiritual journey requires persistent effort, leading eventually to an awareness. I call it a mystical awareness, but an awareness that will always be with you. I'll end with a quote from a Catholic mystic priest and psychologist, a guy named Anthony DeMello. He was asked, "Is there anything I can do to make myself enlightened?" He said, "As little as you can do to make the sun rise in the morning." Then what use are the spiritual exercises you prescribe to make sure you're not asleep when the sun rises in the morning?